Obviously, a lot going on last night. The unofficial kickoff of the 2024 presidential campaign took place in Milwaukee with the first Republican debate. 8 candidates on the stage battling back and forth and trying to separate themselves. Joining us this morning, a commentator over at Young Voices, Sam Mangold-Lenett joins us. Sam, good morning to you. Hope all is well. Assess the situation last night from your vantage point, and who do you think won, who do you think lost?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
So I think there was no definitive winner on the debate stage. I think the only clear winner in the Republican primary after last night, after the events of last night, at least, was former President Trump. And polls are probably likely going to clearly keep indicating that he is the definitive forerunner in the race. I think the best performer in the debate was Vivek Ramaswamy. I think he was the most dynamic personality on stage. I think he articulated the most clear and dynamic vision for America's future. I think Ron DeSantis, Florida Governor DeSantis, had a nuanced perspective on various policy issues, but he came across as very robotic and at least I believe he came across as very uncomfortable and very robotic on stage. More or less, everybody else just didn't really know what time it was. They didn't have a good reading on. They didn't have a good reading on the pulse of their constituencies, and kept talking as though it was the 2012 Republican primary, not the 2024 Republican primary.
You point that out. I think one campaign started and ended last night, Sam, and that would be Asa Hutchinson, who decided, you talk about not being able to read the room, who decided it was a great idea to say that the guy who's winning 50, 60, 70% in some polls, the former president, is morally unfit for office due to January the 6th. I mean, the boos from the crowd, unbelievable. I can't imagine what him and his camp are thinking. I mean, what a boneheaded decision.
Yeah, and it's. I wrote at the Federalist a couple months ago when he initially announced his campaign that people are under no obligation to take Asa Hutchinson seriously. His campaign, at least I firmly believe, is just a grift to take small dollar donor dollars and just enrich himself so he can go on television, hear his name said by important people, sell a book that gets bumped up the New York Times bestseller list because he's a Republican who's supposed to be a good Republican, and go on a speaking tour. He was never a serious contender. Anybody who thought he was a serious contender needs to have their brain checked. Asa Hutchinson is just in it to get rich. He and his ilk need to not be taken seriously and need to be excised from the party.
I'll say this. I thought Doug Burgum, who is polling very low, I thought he had a pretty decent night. He was able to articulate a lot of points. At one point, I think one of the lines of the night for him was they were talking about crime in big cities and everything else. He said, well, what about the small towns? I'm from a town of 300 people, and this is how we handle things in some small towns. I wonder how he comes out of this debate. I thought some of his comments were pretty impressive.
Yeah, I thought Doug Burgum had a very given his relatively small national profile,
sure.
I thought it was a impressive showing, and given the fact he just tore his Achilles tendon, it's even more impressive. I think I don't think he's really going anywhere with his campaign, but he's very clearly undervalued. He's a very interesting character. He got his start in tech and then went into politics. I think his value, I think his perspective as kind of, a small town governor, so to speak, it could be appreciated, but I just don't see how that perspective sure, I guess the aesthetic and the ethos can be applied on the national level. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear him speak more. I'd certainly like to see him get more press coverage and talk a lot more about things. I guess I'm just curious, how exactly does that apply to a lot of the issues we're facing? How are you going to take that and how are you going to take the small town America ethos and apply it to dismantling the administrative state and the weaponization of the federal government?
That's a very good point. A commentator from Young Voices, Sam Mangold-Lenett, joins us here this morning. All right, Sam, this is probably going to be an unpopular opinion, but I have it written down, and I say what I mean what I say. I thought Pence I was very impressed with Pence. I was not expecting Mike. We all know what Mike Pence is. He's a very kind of buttoned up guy, doesn't really say anything all too bombastic. One might describe him as kind of a little bit milquetoast. I thought he showed up pretty strong last night. He was running on the accomplishments of he kept saying the Trump-Pence administration, big on policy, came out as articulating himself as the strongest conservative on the stage. I was surprised by him. I don't think it moves the needle, but I was impressed with how fiery he came out on some various topics.
Yeah, I was certainly surprised at how aggressive he sort of seemed. This is a guy who we kind of really only know as the pro-life person attached to Trump to shore up evangelical support from 2016. More or less, Mike Pence has maintained a relatively low profile for most of his national political career, save for, the January 6th stuff. I think despite all of that, I still don't think he's going anywhere. I think the far and away the clear winner of the primary, I think, will be Donald Trump. And I think voters are still upset with Pence over everything he did on January 6th, et cetera, et cetera. And I also just think Pence is another one of those Republican candidates who just doesn't have an idea of what's going on amongst their constituencies. He thinks, like in that exchange with Ramaswamy, where he said, we just need a government as good as its people. And in response, Vivek said, we're in a dark moment. Vivek is absolutely correct. We're in a very dark moment, whereas Pence is still thinking everyone in America just wants America to be great. He thinks we're all a cohesive people wanting the same thing when we, in fact, are not. Pence is out of step and out of touch. But he is punching hard on some things that he knows about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you said everybody knows Pence, right? You know the expectation, you know what you're getting, and to see something different from him, I thought caught my eye. The two folks from South Carolina, Nikki Haley and Tim Scott. Tim Scott, I couldn't tell you a single thing he said that was useful last night. Nikki Haley trying to invoke the woman card to be, I'm not yelling and screaming, and then cutting off a bunch of candidates later on in the event. They seem to have a terrible night in my book.
Yeah, I don't. Those candidacies aren't going anywhere. Tim Scott, I have trouble. I don't know who their support is. I guess Nikki Haley, it's military contractors. Tim Scott, it's the few remaining undecided moderates. I'm of the mentality that it's a better use of time and is more respectful to the constituency just to coalesce around two or three candidates and that those three duke it out, because we know who those 2 to 3 are. It's Donald Trump, it's Ron DeSantis, it's Vivek Ramaswamy. Just stop wasting everyone's time, stop wasting small dollar donors, stop grifting. We're not in a situation where it's not 2006 anymore. It's a pretty much, as Michael Anton said in leading up to the 2016 election, it's pretty much another Flight 93 election. You don't have the luxury of pondering lofty ideals. You have to figure out how to most effectively win this thing, or we may not be able to come back from it.
Yeah.
And it's the debate was opened with the song Rich Men North of Richmond. And that song is an explicit lamentation of America's rapid cultural and economic decay. And so the debate was predicated upon asking who's the person most capable of reversing that decay if it's possible to reverse it. And we need to figure out who that is and stop wasting time and make sure we can push that person across the finish line.
A couple final candidates for you. Chris Christie, who is, I think you could argue, is probably the most seasoned debater on that stage. He was attempting to be Trump light in some regards. A couple of good one-liners. I don't know why the hell Fox News asked him a question about UFOs. I can't imagine why that was a relevant point at all. He had a pretty interesting night, a nice little jab at Ramaswamy, calling him an AI chatbot. What did you make of Chris Christie's night?
So I actually think Chris Christie's kind of an interesting guy. I think maybe it's because maybe it's just because he's from New Jersey and he's just like that, or maybe it's his experience as a prosecutor. I appreciate his perspective. I appreciate how tenacious he is. But that's kind of all his utility is at this point, is being, kind of a sideshow, I hate to say.
No, you're right. Absolutely.
I don't see him bringing any interesting, anything of utility to the discourse. His whole campaign is predicated upon sabotaging Trump. That's why he's running for president. He doesn't want Donald Trump to be president again. That's pretty much it. And I don't really know who his support is, other than the moderates who don't want Trump to be president. But he doesn't really have any beliefs other than the standard. Just everybody kind of believes the same basic 7 things and then variations therein. So I don't know. He's interesting. He's fun to watch in the debate stage. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, fun to watch is definitely the case. And, he does make a compelling point when he says, hey, I was a Republican, I was a conservative in a deep blue state and beat an incumbent Democrat for governor. His term as governor was not the roses that he wants to make it out to be. There's some serious problems under his administration. Sam Mangold-Lenett joins us this morning. Sam, you write over at The Federalist. How can folks find some of that stuff?
Yeah, so you can find it over at thefederalist.com. And you can find me on Twitter at SMLENETT.
Sam, thanks for the time, my man. Greatly appreciate it. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure.